Oh, baby. Oh, baby. You guys want to know something really special? One of his favorite things in the world is to find rats. Dead or alive, he doesn't care. If you want to see him at his happiest, it's when he has a rat. He found one this morning. Oh yeah, you like that, didn't you? You like that rat. Hey guys, welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are going to be going over some practical tips, in my opinion, if you find yourself shopping for a used RC vehicle. Some of you may not be aware of some of the things that you need to look for, because buying used, I get the concept. Got a budget, you want your RC racing dollars to go a little bit further. I'm with you, I'm on board 100%, but sometimes buying a used vehicle could actually be the worst thing that you could do to make that RC budget go as far as possible. So let me explain. Here before us as an example car that I just picked up off of eBay, and I'm super excited about this. You say, well, there you go, Ryan. You bought a used RC car. So that's all the explanation I need. Hang on, let me give you some context. This particular car, yes, I'm gonna use it as an example of what you might need to do to a used RC vehicle, but this is actually going to be converted back to a rear motor configuration car, so I can go do some really fun outdoor things. Gonna do a video in the future and compare like lay down to stand up to rear motor in like the loose outdoor Lomi stuff and see how fun it is. So, but anyways, that's for a different video. Today's video, we'll be going through this and I'll show you some things that I immediately became aware of as soon as I got the car in person. And I was like, man, buying used is just so sketchy sometimes. But before we get to that, I need to give a huge thank you to the folks over at Cow RC for sending me these amazing products that I've been using on my cars recently in the outdoor scene. We all know that our cars get dirty, and this stuff definitely helps clean it up or keep it clean, get it clean, whatever the scenario is. I need to give these guys a huge shout out and say thank you for sending me this stuff. This Moo Clean is actually really cool. If you guys haven't heard about it before, it's super awesome. How else to explain this? If you go on the website and you look at the description of the product, it makes sense because it doesn't feel as harsh as something like the tried and true Simple Green method. Simple Green tends to dry out my hands or dry out tires or dry out plastic parts over time. This stuff is designed specifically not to do that. Something about its pH balance, and it's designed to work with lubricants and not pull them out of the things that it may be sprayed on. So if you're using it to clean a car or clean your tires, it's probably the best thing that you could do if you're trying to preserve them, or things like your hands. So really awesome stuff. I've loved it so far. Link down in the description. The other thing here that I've loved so much is this silicone spray that they have. I'm not going to say that this is leaps and bounds better than other silicone sprays that I've used, but it does work very well as a traditional silicone spray. Not super aggressive or slimy or greasy, but does an excellent job at giving things a nice protective coating and then keeping our cars nice and shiny. And technically, since it's a silicone spray, it does act as a mild lubricant. So more details down at their website in the link down below. If you guys want to grab some stuff, I highly recommend it, especially if you're doing that outdoor dirty stuff racing like me. It's a must-have. Back to talking about this thing. If you find yourself wanting to save some of your hard-earned dollars and stretching your RC budget, like I said, I'm with you. Buying used, immediately you might think, oh, I could save like $50 to $100 off of the price of a kit, and this would help me get my ball rolling or help me get that extra car. If we're talking about just rollers, no electronics, just the kit, there's some things that we need to look at and be aware of. When you buy a used car, expect the worst. As much as I want these things to last forever, there's a lot of parts on here that are going to wear out. Some are going to wear out quicker than others, but when you buy a used one, you need to inspect all these components if you want the car to perform at its best. If you're just getting a car to bash around and you really don't care about its performance, well, then maybe it doesn't really matter at all. But if you find yourself in the racing category and you want this thing to be consistent, handle well, drive well, we're gonna have to go through the car and look at some things. Easiest way to tell if a car has had a lot of miles put on it. Technically, actually, that's true. It could technically have miles, even though they're toy cars. Anyways, easiest way to tell is take a quick glance at the bottom of the vehicle. Oftentimes, you're going to see a lot of wear or minimal wear. One thing that I found really fascinating with this particular car is that there are areas on the vehicle that indicate a high level of wear, but then when you look at this particular chassis, it has no scratches on it. A few scuffs from what I imagine was maybe some carpet use, but actual scratches, this thing is pretty clean. So I was pretty pleased about that. In particular, being one of the main components of the vehicle, the chassis, it's in pretty good shape. If yours looks like it's gonna have a ton of wear and things like the rear T-plate area is super ground down, you may start to think it might be time to replace that chassis plate. And those, depending on your vehicle, might be kind of pricey. I'm gonna ballpark that an estimated cost on a 2-wheel drive chassis or a 4-wheel drive buggy chassis, or even more expensive, something like an 8 scale, it's gonna be in the range of like $50 to $60. You may be able to find something on sale, might be a little bit cheaper in your scenario, but just so you know, it can be kind of pricey. The next thing that I'm gonna try and figure out is, are the bearings good or not? I'm going to assume that they are on their way out. Bad bearings can be a huge hassle for a lot of reasons. When those start to go bad, they can create excess slop in the vehicle. If they get really bad, they can cause the car to bind up and not roll efficiently, causing things like your motor and your ESC to overheat and cause even further damage and cost you even more money. When you get a new vehicle, I would expect a minimum of replacing things like the rear hub bearings or maybe the bearings in the diffs. If it's a 4-wheel drive car, you're gonna have some in the front, the center, and the rear. But in this case, you're just gonna have the bearings in the rear of the vehicle since this is a 2-wheel drive buggy. Bottom line is, bearings will most likely need to be replaced to some capacity. Worst case scenario, if you buy an entire bearing kit, that can get kind of pricey. You can go as the fancy route of getting some full ceramic kits out there, and that can be upwards of $100 or more, or you can get something that's more along lines of like kit spec bearings, and you might spend something between like $30 to $50 on a kit like that. Aside from things that would be obvious, if you see something that is cracked or bent, that's obviously going to be very subjective to the particular vehicle you may have purchased or are looking at. Replace those things accordingly. The next thing I'm going to look at is going to be the shocks. Now, I'm pretty picky about my shocks because I know that there is a tremendous amount of importance with them working properly, being very new, fresh, and smooth. If they're not, you're going to have to replace some parts. The first thing that I'm going to suggest that you replace in the shocks, regardless of their condition, because I want you to start with a fresh, smoothly operating vehicle, and you know exactly what the mileage is on this particular part, is the shock O-rings and, if applicable, the machined inserts. Regardless of how old they are or how long they've been in the car, definitely recommend you start fresh with those. Reason being is that those typically aren't going to be a tremendously expensive maintenance item. Shock O-rings can cost anywhere from like $5 to $10. They may be sold in complete sets or pairs depending on your vehicle, but just make sure you get enough so that you can rebuild all 4 shocks. Taking the shocks just one step further, I would definitely take a look at the shock shafts as well. These you might be able to reuse, you might not. My suggestion for you is inspect them closely. If you see any scratches on them at all, or nicks of any kind, they're done. They're toast. You need to replace them. Reason being, even if the shock shaft isn't bent and you can still move the shock smoothly, that etched surface is going to eat into your shock O-rings over time, and it's just going to cause things to wear out, and technically it's not going to be as smooth as it possibly could be. So, depending on the type of shock shafts that they are, there are some fancier ones out there that have like titanium nitride coating, which is really nice. Some don't have that, so they might be a little bit cheaper. Ballpark expense on that is probably going to be around $20 to $30 to replace your shock shafts if needed. The next thing I see that's typically really blown out when it comes to the shocks is going to be at the ends of the shocks where it's mounted on the vehicle. particularly where the shock cap meets the shock tower. A lot of times there's going to be a little plastic insert, and that plastic insert is designed to wear out over time. If yours has a lot of slop and the shock cap is just kind of flopping around, you definitely need to replace them. Those aren't terribly expensive. They usually come in packs of 4 or maybe more. I don't know, depending on your vehicle, but I would imagine those are going to be anywhere from $5 to $10. Not terribly expensive, but most likely you'll have to replace those as well. Next, we're going to move on to the A-arms. Now, this is where it can be kind of tricky because it may not look cracked or broken at all, but the thing that I'm concerned about is, does the A-arm have a lot of slop where the hinge pin rides? Simply meaning there's a hole there over time. If it just continues to wear, dirt gets in there, grime, whatever, they can tend to develop some excess slop. When that happens, it's an undesired effect because it can change a lot of the geometry in the car as it's going through a corner based on how it's just reacting to bumps. You want that to be a little bit more tight and fresh fitting, so you may or may not need to replace those A-arms if you want the vehicle to perform like new. Cost on A-arms is probably going to be between about $10, $15 again, depending on your vehicle. Since we just brought them up, the hinge pins themselves, you're definitely going to want to take all of those out and inspect them and make sure that they are all straight and true. If they're not and they're bent, don't try and bend them back to straight, just buy a new pack. Usually they come in a set for the entire vehicle. Some may be different depending on what yours is, but those are going to range anywhere from like maybe $10 to $20 depending on the hinge pins, how many and what they're made out of. Other items that you want to pay attention and make sure that they are not bent are going to be things like drive shafts or dog bones. These things easily get bent over time after taking a hard crash, and you want to make sure that yours are going to be straight. Easiest thing to do is, as the car is sitting there, either apply some throttle or just free spin the wheels and see if they are rotating and it looks like they're straight. If they're getting all wonky and they're bouncing around, well, then you have one that's bent and it's time to replace it. These typically come in pairs and they're going to run anywhere from $15 to $20 depending on if it's like a whole dog bone set or if it comes with the axle or without. There's going to be some variance out there, so see which one is going to apply to you. Little pro tip, I would suggest that if you do have to replace it, I would go ahead and purchase a new axle as well. Why? Because the next thing that usually wears out is where that dog bone meets the axle assembly. Over time, that joint can wear out. Whether it's the holes or the pins or any other components that are in there, it's obviously not designed to last forever and it will need replaced at some point in time. Yours may or may not need it at this time, but I definitely suggest that if you're going to do one, go ahead and do them all so that you have a fresh start and you can get a little bit more life out of all the new parts that you're putting in there. Let's see, what else are you gonna possibly run into when going through a used vehicle? You might run into some screws that are either stripped out or maybe not matching, or maybe just some stuff that's just in the wrong place. So don't be surprised if you need to go and purchase some screws to make sure that everything fits and is put together correctly. That's going to be really hard to tell beforehand. You're not going to know it until you get into the car itself. So may or may not apply, but definitely be aware it is something you may encounter. Screws can be anywhere from 50 cents to you could spend over $100 on a full titanium set. That's going to be really subjective as to what your vehicle needs. Last major component that I can suggest you're going to need to go through, regardless of what condition the car is in, is going to be your diffs. Now, if you have a four-wheel drive vehicle, you're most likely going to have at least two. You're going to have a front, a rear, and possibly a center. Definitely strip them all apart so that you can inspect them and make sure that you know exactly what is in those diffs. For two reasons. One, I've seen it before where somebody said, oh yeah, they're fresh, just rebuilt them, they're brand new, I promise. I go and take it apart, it looks like that diff has never been rebuilt in its life, and there's hardly any fluid left in it at all. Obviously that's not good, we don't want that, so taking it apart, inspect what's in there. You may or may not need to replace some parts. If it's a gear diff, you may be able to get away with the gears that are in there, you might not. You'll just have to look in there and see. If it looks like the diff cases have a lot of wear where the gear pins sit, you definitely don't want to continue to run that case, because that gear system might just totally bind up or do something crazy and ruin a race at some point in time in the future. You definitely don't want that to happen. Diff cases typically aren't very expensive, but just be aware it's something that you do need to inspect and make sure that it's not worn out. If it's something like a ball diff, like what you might find in a car like this, that's going to be a little bit simpler. You are going to, in my opinion, need to get the diff rings, the diff balls, and the thrust assembly. Buy them all new. Don't take them out and just clean them up and put it all back together, because all those parts are still worn down and not new. Easiest way to make a two-wheel drive buggy handle like garbage is to run a diff that is super worn out. So anticipate having to spend at least $20 on a diff rebuild kit so that you can make sure that your diff is nice and buttery smooth. So I could go on and on and on about all the other little detailed items of things that might need to be replaced, but I think you get the point. I've gone through all the major components of a vehicle that you would need to inspect first and foremost, and what you might possibly and most likely will need to replace. Let's say you save $100 buying a used kit, but then as you can see, as I was going through it, it's very easy to rack up $20 here, $30 there, $10 here, $5 there, and before you know it, you're at $100 in parts just to make this thing like new again. But guess what? It's not new. It's only like 30% new at that point. Not saying you can't get a good deal on a used vehicle and it save you some money. There are plenty of racers out there that take excellent care of their vehicles, and it would do you well for another several years of racing. Think of me as the pessimist in this situation and trying to give you the opportunity so that somebody doesn't say, "I told you so," when they were saying you probably shouldn't buy that super dirty clapped out car that you saw on Facebook Marketplace. If you're just out there having fun, bashing around, you really don't care about the competition side of things, have at it. Go to town, run it till it explodes and burns into the ground. If you're out there and you're trying to race this thing and it perform as best as it can, I'm probably going to encourage people to get a new kit for several reasons. One, you won't have to do all that nonsense I just told you about. Two, it will familiarize yourself with the vehicle. If you've never built one before, there's nothing better than taking that thing from a box of parts, putting it together, and then having a better understanding of how it went together. That is going to be so incredibly valuable on race day. When you encounter a problem or you break something, you'll have a much better understanding and recollection of how this thing is put together. I've put the ball in your court, as it were. If you need to buy a used vehicle to save every dollar because that's the only way it's going to happen for you, trust me, I understand. I've been there myself. If you do have the ability to buy this vehicle and you have a budget to put some spare parts into it, I would maybe consider just go ahead and buy a new vehicle so that you can start with something that's new, you know how it's put together, and that thing is going to be minty fresh. As for me and my TLR 22 2.0, I needed a car to make into a rear motor, and this is my only option because Jeremy Harris is a jerk and he bought the last TLR 22 2.0 in a box that I could see. All right, well, that is everything that I have to say about buying used vehicles. Not totally against it, but definitely just need to think about it. Make sure that it's the right choice for you. Before we wrap this one up, I do need to give a huge shout out and thank you to everyone supporting me over on my Patreon. So, like always, everybody up on the screen, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much. I shot everybody a message. We've been doing some cool stuff behind the scenes, so I just wanted to make sure that you guys saw that, and I just wanted to say thank you again for that. If you were a part of my Patreon, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And then, of course, I need to give a huge and special shout out to all of my top tier supporters, starting with Brandon Helton, Robert Black, Tim Juskiewicz, Brad Parsons, and of course, Mr. Alex Johnson. Thank you all so much. So that's everything that I had to say for you guys today. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it was helpful if you're finding yourself in that situation. Again, thank you to the Cow RC guys. Their product is awesome. Again, link down in the description below. And that's going to be it for this one. So if you guys have a question about some stuff that you're working on, maybe you're looking at a used vehicle, Can't say that I can offer an opinion because I'm going to trust that you are all big boys and girls and you can make these decisions on your own. That's it for now. We'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.